And I'm so pleased that Dr. Rudy Crew, as he's known in the tabloids, has been able to join us here today. I also want to welcome members of the Medgar Evers College, the team that's here. I know Lakeisha, I know other folks have joined, and we're very pleased that you're here as well. So for those of you who are new to New York or maybe didn't have a kid in public schools in the 90s, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest today. Dr. Crew was appointed president of Medgar Evers College by the CUNY Board of Trustees on June 24th, 2013, and assumed leadership in August of 2013. I need a better mic, so someone needs to deal with that. Thank you. I can use my mom voice. How's that? Okay. Dr. Crew's 30-year career has spanned from classroom to chief state school officer to president of some of this country's most important educational institutions. Dr. Crew is a renowned leader and reformer who has made it his mission to improve student achievement. Okay. Especially for poor and minority students. He has always worked closely with all stakeholders to expand opportunities for students. As chancellor of our hometown, the nation's largest school district, New York City, and then as superintendent in Miami, Dr. Crew placed those cities' lowest performing schools in virtual districts whose boundaries were defined by student need, not geography. In New York City, Dr. Crew developed new strategies, including the adoption of curriculum standards for all schools, the creation of new mechanisms for school governance, the introduction of school-based budgeting, sound familiar, and the implementation of a process to screen all students for giftedness using a range of criteria. Dr. Crew also started the Parent Academy, which served more than 150,000 families, parents and families, with workshops and events designed to help them support their children's achievement. Dr. Crew has also written a book, Only Connect, The Way to Save Our Schools. It continues to guide a very important discussion about school reform and issues of equity in our country. He is the recipient of many awards, including the NAACP Educational Leadership Award, the Arthur Ashe Leadership Award, and the 2008 National Superintendent of the Year Award. Dr. Crew was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, and is a graduate of Babson College in Wellesley, Mass. He earned his master's in business and doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. I am so pleased that Dr. Crew has joined me today at Coffee with the Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
So I talked to Dr. Crew earlier, and I said it's a really friendly crowd, and we just kind of talk and have coffee. So I guess my first question to you is tell us a little bit about your path and to Medgar Evers and why you chose education.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Shola, and it's a wonderful, wet Friday afternoon to have this conversation. The path here is actually rather circuitous. My father, my mother died when I was very young. My father wanted to go into creating a business for himself. He basically said, I'll do the barbecue, you do the books. And so off to business school I went. Of interest to me was his world as a musician. So while I was a young kid, you know, he lived on St. Nicholas Avenue here in Harlem. And I spent a fair amount of time in and back between Poughkeepsie and here, and really kind of understanding this whole question of how the world makes money, and then who in the world has money. And out of all that came life's lessons that then led me to go to college. When I went to college, I majored in economics. I really wanted to understand this business of the world's GDP. I wanted to understand, without even knowing about it, I just wanted to understand how money was made. And then when I got out of school, I realized that I really didn't want a career in business. What I really wanted was a career in education. I started coaching taught in a private school in the early days of desegregation outside of Boston. Loved teaching, loved working with young people, their families, et cetera. And I just realized that was really going to be my passion. So from the time I graduated from undergraduate school, I pursued education, and that's brought me around through several jobs to now be the president of Medgar Evers.
So we're going to talk a bit about that, but folks here have heard me talk about, you know, when the mayor calls you and asks you to take a job, kind of what goes through your mind.
Yeah.
So when then Mayor Giuliani called you, what did you think? And what were you doing, and what made you say yes?
At the time, I was superintendent of schools in Tacoma, Washington. I had been, prior to that, the superintendent of schools in Sacramento, California. The then Secretary of Education, Dick Riley, called and said, you know, this was during the Clinton administration, and basically said, listen, there are a lot of things that are happening, and you know, you should really be aware that, you know, there are going to be big school systems, and you're somebody that we want to keep our eye on. This was when I was in Tacoma. And I said, oh, yeah, well, you know, I mean, as careers open up and things happen, you know. And it was literally within about 3 or 4 months after that that I got a call from, at that time, the Board of Education, who, I guess Rudy went into big problems trying to keep a chancellor here. And they said, you know what, we'd at least like to talk to you about possibly coming back to New York. And I said, well, but I have a job here, and I really sort of like my job. And from what I've read, you know, I was still, as a New Yorker, you read about New York even though you're not in it. But I said, you know, who's going to take that job with this guy? I don't know this man. Yeah. And they said, well, why don't you at least just come back? I said, well, I'll come back, but it's, you know, I don't have any interest in this. And I got back, and I met with Rudy sort of in the heat of the night. Flew back in like a red eye. We met at about 6:30 in the morning. And it was an interesting conversation in the sense that it was really a conversation as humanly as two people can have a conversation in the political world. It was a human conversation about who are you, and who am I going to be in your space, and who are you going to be in my space. And it was less about, you know, the mayor and more about the man. And I remember saying to him, you know, I'm too big of a guy, physically in any other way. I just don't work. I don't operate off this premise of I got to be afraid of someone. And everything I've read about you in the paper from the previous superintendent, who, by the way, used to be my superintendent when I was a teacher in Pasadena. Ray Cortines was my superintendent, when I became a teacher. And I said, you know, everybody I've heard of, you know, that I respect in my professional career has talked about this as a fearful relationship. You know, that you have to lead, but you lead under the mantle of fear. And I said, I can't do this. I cannot be that guy. I can be a lot of things. I cannot be coming to work afraid of you. And he said, well, you know, there's no reason to be afraid of me. He said, if you can perform and you can do what I asked you to do, and so on and so on. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, whoa, whoa. What do you mean do what you asked me to do? He said, well, you know, there are things I really need done. I said, like what? He said, well, you know, the budget is a mess. You know, the test scores are a mess. The way by which the school system functions is inefficient. And so he gave me this laundry list, none of which I found particularly objectionable. I found myself, now remember, my background as an economist said, you can fix most things if you understand an approach to it that's different than the way that the problem was created in the first place. Right? If you go down the same road as the problem was created, then all you're going to really do is meet the same problem. I would much rather look at this from a totally different lens. And I said, well, you know, my mind is framed around, you know, sort of supply and demand, right? So public schools they're at that time 1,100. You got a budget at that time of about $13 billion. However you want to call it, public or private, it's shaped by the same market demands of supply and demand. Who wants your schools? Who doesn't want your schools? Why do they want your schools? And so when I finished going through this with him, he said, "You're hired." I said, "Not so fast." Not so fast. I said, "We got to cover this question about, what you want." He said, "Well, I want all those things fixed." I said, "Yeah, but I got to ask you some other questions." I said, "What about, this whole thing with private money coming into schools? I've been reading about this thing, these vouchers and all of that." He said, "Rudy, guarantee you, I have no interest in that. I guarantee you I have no interest in that. I've just been talking about it as a way of being able to spearhead the institution to change." I said, "Okay." I said, "Now, I'm a Democrat. I'm a stone cold card carrying Democrat. Have been. My father was. My middle name is Franklin, right? You know what I mean? My father was serious about about being a Democrat. So I don't ask me to be that. Don't ask me to be something I'm not politically." I said, "I can't support that." I said, "I won't ever ask you to do that. I won't ever ask you to support these other schools." And I said, "I'm an African American guy. I care about what happens to my people. I care about what happens to communities of color writ large. I care about what happens to these communities." He said, "I'll never ask you to do anything against that." He said, "We got a deal." And we literally shook hands. And that's how I got the job. I never heard another word from him about any of those things other than when I got fired.
Well, know about that. We want to know a little bit about that. But, for those who follow education, and I think most people know, I started my career out in education. And so when you were starting in New York, this was pre a lot of the current conversation around education reform in this country, right? This was pre Teach for America and pre core standards and all the things that are now kind of the buzzwords. So you walk into the system, the budget's a mess, the UFT is driving everyone crazy, the performance gap is what it is. Where did you start?
I always look at big organizations as being able to be easier solved than smaller organizations because you have the economy of a big system that you can atomize, pull it apart before you synthesize. You literally have to pull it apart. Now, small organizations are harder to dissect, but big organizations come apart actually pretty easily. You can look at each other's, I can look at the division budgets and see who's got a high burn rate, who doesn't. You could look at the overall scheme of what the budget says in terms of actual dollars, and you could determine whether it looks like you're sort of winning or losing on the financials. But once I start there, then I ask myself, now against the mission of this organization, how does this money leverage me? Am I winning? Am I likely to win this race using the dollars the way that we've been using them? Or is this race going to be lost? So in the case of communities that are poor, I always think we're going to lose that. We're always going to lose that one because we either don't invest enough or we invest poorly. So I look at, and at that time, we didn't have school-based budgeting, so it was harder for me to determine. But for example, if you think that public education would be better served by having more opportunities for parents to select new and different schools that match the learning styles of their children, if you believe that, then ask yourself what communities already have them and which communities don't. And the ones that don't, you've got a development and design piece of work to do. The ones that do, it's a different piece of work. It's not development and design. This is all about extension and continuation. So the extension dollars are generally just sort of rollover dollars. The development and design dollars are different. So you have to literally start thinking about how, in a big organization, do I disaggregate what I need to spend where? Not everybody gets the same dollar. Not everybody needs the same dollar. There are some places that need disproportionately more money. And then it becomes a political conversation from there. If you give more money to, let's just say Harlem, and the districts that are in Harlem now, if you give more money there, who will be upset about that? And how do you then counterbalance their degree of upset over, this redistribution of money? I remember thinking, I got very annoyed when I was superintendent in Miami, and I asked the same question in Miami, and Miami was like maybe 400,000 students at the time. And so it's roughly a third the size of New York City. And I remembered asking, why does the gifted and talented program exist in certain sections of Miami, and these kids, and then not in others? So you go to Overtown, right? Overtown, or you go to what is essentially a predominantly Haitian community or even a poor Latino community, and they don't have a gifted program for almost at all. And you go to certain sections of South Miami and the beach, and you found that there were just, sort of these programs all over. And it really annoyed me. I mean, it's such a blatant thing. Now, you can have your own opinion about gifted and talented programs writ large, but the fact of the matter is, if we see this as a good, and parents should have access to it, then what you've essentially said is there's some parents who will never have access to it, and there's some who do. And I just don't fundamentally believe that. So I made everybody in Miami start a gifted program. And when I spread that money that way, I still can't, I have to fly over Miami now, because people fundamentally get angry when you redistribute money. The hard part about your industry, the hard part about what is happening right now in American public service and in entities like public education, housing, health, is this is about redistribution of money. This is not about new dollars. There are very few new dollars that are going to be put on anything. There are a few here and there, but they're in the margins. This is about the redistribution of money. People feel taxed enough already, so nobody wants to come up with more tax money. Now, whatever they're going to talk about here in Washington, they're going to do, but that's, sort of, we're in that crazy place. But the fact of the matter is, in most public institutions of housing, education, health, you are looking at the redistribution of existing dollars to accommodate, if you will, new and different populations of people. And people get upset about that. People get very upset about that. So that's what leadership is now being paid to do.
And so you sort of begin to look at your large system as the head of the country's largest public school system. You have today's session has been about managing risk. And so what were some of the risks that were very clear to you, and then what were some that were surprises to you, and how did you manage them?
The first risk is taking the job in the first place. Right?
Saying yes.
I mean, I can think of enough, not only jobs that I've had, but jobs that are reflected in this room, where the risk you took was when you signed on. And that was your first place of risk. Now, I argue if you're going to take that risk, then everything else should be easier. Everything else you intellectually want to do should actually flow from that risk. My kids gave me a card one day when I first came to New York as chancellor, and I'll never forget, the card said, "Dad, this is for you. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all." And I've kind of lived by that. Either you're going to take the risk and do the job, or don't take the job. Just don't do it. Because faking the funk has no value at all to the people you say you want to serve. And then you look like a complete fraud. And those of us who are in the field for the purpose for which we are ordained to do this work, right, in the sense that this is from your soul, there are those of us who will discern, and they work with and for you. They'll discern that you're basically a fraud. So you really do have to say, your first risk is, I took this job. Then say to yourself, now, how long a period do I intend to stay here and do this? Because this is like cowboys talk about, you got to ride a horse 8 seconds in order to, in a rodeo, you got to ride 8 seconds to be able to be in the money, right? So I actually think you got to stay on 8 seconds. To me, that's about 5 to 7 years. It's about a 5 to 7 year period. Now, if you take them, if you take these jobs, and I'm talking about jobs that like I've taken, you have to realize that it will not be very long before the knives come out, the distribution people get angry with you, the fact that you have too many of X, call it whatever you want, too many women, too many blacks, too many Latinos, too many people who were here from then, too many people who are of this or of that. I mean, everybody's got their own demon. And once they start sort of looking at you with an eye toward, well, we got to figure out how to get you a pathway out of here, you mark your day from that day on the calendar to about 5 to 7 years, and you had better have a lot of your work done then. So I understand that change management requires a perspective about time management, that you really you don't have forever. First of all, clients can't wait. Second of all, the issue runs hot and cold. And third of all, you don't have forever to get it done. So I've taken these jobs, and this risk assignment for me is do it well, do it fast, and then get off the stage. And be prepared to let go of the very thing you signed on to do. Don't get married to it. And if you do, recognize that, you can take some vestige of it into the next place. But, if you do it well, especially in this climate, if you do it well and you do it with purpose, you're going to make dramatic change, but it's going to cost you.
So that's an interesting advice, because leading large organizations and systems as you have, I'm sure there were some hard-fought lessons and in all of them. So would love to hear what some of those were, and what would you have told yourself then in taking that job in Miami or taking the job in New York?
So one of the things that the country has endured over the course of the last several years has been this question of everybody knows the right answer as to how to fix public education. Everybody in the political spectrum has to be the sort of education governor, the education mayor, the education something or other. And so one of the major challenges was to withstand the pressure of everybody else's solution versus yours. A doctor in the operating room doesn't have to withstand anybody's other recommendation other than what he or she says is going to happen to this patient during the operation. Yeah, right.
Sorry,
Show me the restroom. So there is a temptation oftentimes to politically accept everybody else's definition of the problem and everybody else's solution to the problem. And I reject that. I believe that, if you hire me to run this organization, you're hiring me for two purposes. One, to make sure that the organizational structure and the theology and the belief and the vision of this organization comports with what we say we want to do. And secondly, you hire me to get it done. And I just think that you're ultimately going to have to pay the price of, you're going to have to listen to my suggestions for this. Now, I'm not omnipotent. I'm not trying to be a know-it-all, but I do believe that I know more, having served in these positions, than the average person who is in my case, a school board member, right? With all due respect to school board members, wherever they may be, you don't know reading programs like I know reading programs. You don't know math programs. You don't know what should be a third grade reading standard or how to assess reading in a classroom. You don't know that. That's technical, inside baseball kind of work. So there's a certain point at which, the important part of doing the job is to have the autonomy to do the job, right. And not be constricted by sort of this power vortex that comes in from out left field, and you can play that game if you want to, but you don't get to have them both. You can either have power or you can have autonomy, but you can't have them both.
Interesting. So the job is getting it done, getting in there, getting it done, but you also know that you do that, with and so many, in the case of New York City, thousands of New York City school teachers, administrators, et cetera. So how did you motivate staff to, buy into, align them with your vision when you began as chancellor or in other systems?
That's a very good question. This question of motivation is, in many respects, it's a spiritual question. We think about it as a management question or a leadership question, but for me, it's really a spiritual question. It's the notion of looking at your respective employee counterparts and colleagues and asking them to meet themselves. The hill we will climb in housing, the hill we will climb in the pursuit of the antivenom, if you will, to poverty, the hill we will climb in education as the antivenom to illiteracy, is a hill that is steep and unending. And if you sign up to climb that hill, you have to be prepared to help people meet themselves. It pushes you in places that you just don't even know you're ever going to go. It pushes you into decision-making that you didn't ever think was going to be there. It's not a flat line. It's not a direct position from you to the next week or the next day. It caroms off of things. It bounces off political realities. It bounces off of financial interests. I remember getting a call one day from the cardinal at the time saying, listen, I had a conversation with the mayor, and he's allocated $3 million of your budget to come to some of the Catholic schools because the Archdiocese is in need of a little bit of money. And I said to him, Holy Father, that doesn't sound right to me. There's something wrong with that. He said, well, I can appreciate that it doesn't sound right, but you really should have to take that up with the mayor. I'm just calling you out of respect. And so who would have thought, right, that I'm going to find myself as chancellor of New York City Public Schools arguing with the Catholic Church about $3 million. And yet it's $3 million of money, of Title I money that was going to the poorest communities in New York City. So the question in my mind was, do I take this on, right, on behalf of communities that don't even notice $3 million is going, right? Or do I just simply blink and call it a day, go home, have a glass of wine, and say, oh my goodness, I had a hard day? And that's what I'm saying. It pushes you into these places where you just don't know, but you get to know who you are by the decisions you make. And other people will know you by the decisions you make or the decisions you don't make, right? So it was a quiet. No one knew this was not blown up in the press or anything like that. But it was a quiet fight between Rudy and myself about this $3 million going to the Catholic schools. It got nothing bad about Catholic schools. I went to a Catholic school. There's nothing about that. It's about how dare you take $3 million from kids who can't read, and they need every bit of this after-school money. They need every bit of these tutorials. They need every bit of this $3 million for me to buy all the other assets that on the Upper East Side they already have. So how dare you just think of this as kind of your own private little slush fund to go give it to the Catholic Church? Well, that kind of conversation with a leader like Rudy at the time has to be a backdoor conversation. You got to be smart about where and when to have it. I'm not going to blow it up on the front page of the Times, but the fact of the matter is, I knew my voice. I knew myself well enough to know I'm not going to be pushed over here. Do you know what I mean? And it's not an ego statement. It's just a statement of strength about my vision, and you don't get to superimpose your vision on a community that you seemingly don't care very much about. You don't get to do that. Not in my name, and not with ease. So, it was an ugly backdoor conversation. It resulted in the Holy Father getting his $3 million, but it wasn't my $3 million. you know? It wasn't my $3 million. Somebody else got $3 million. It wasn't mine.
So you've worked in a lot of cities across the country, and I'm curious if you've had what your interactions been like with housing authorities, either when you were here in New York or Miami, which I know, or Washington. And what, if any, lessons or advice would you share with us? Or, you know, in those long nights, would you say, if NYCHA would just insert?
Yeah. More of my conversation around the sort of work with NYCHA would be when I was chancellor here, to some degree in Miami. Every place I've ever worked, every urban community I've ever worked, they have a homelessness issue. And the question for me was always one of, what are we doing collectively to leverage each other's resources against the tyranny, really, of poverty, or safety and security in public housing? How do we start thinking about education in public housing? And it struck me in those cities that we worked in such isolation that it was like there was no linkage between what a school system does and what NYCHA did, or what city housing did. There just was no relationship. They were siloed. They were, or if not siloed, they were sort of minimally connected, right? We did picnics or something small, just programmatic little niceties. I've always said, and was saying to you as we were coming up to the stage, these relationships are completely under-leveraged right now. They're under-leveraged. The problem scale that we have in New York City, the problem scale we have in the United States, is of a magnitude that requires, it's not just smart, it requires collaboration among agencies in ways that we've never invented before. And you see, we've never really been on each other's dance card, so we don't really know how to dance. So here's the torrent of need that begins to make evident itself, and yet we're ill-suited for responding to the need. So I would say the takeaway for me is the power, if you will, of the reduction of isolation. Families need no longer live in isolation in America. It is despicable when I think about how poverty, and I mean poverty in virtually every community that I've ever worked in Oregon, of all places. I've driven through parts of the Northwest and seen poverty the likes of which I didn't see in Harlem or in the Bronx or in poorest congressional districts east of the Mississippi. You just don't necessarily understand what it looks like to live your entire life on a Native American reservation, or in abject poverty, sitting in a mountain community someplace in the Northwest. So I ask myself, these lumber communities bear the same scars of poverty that communities in the Bronx or in Brooklyn bear. And poverty looks like poverty everywhere I've seen it. And the question for me is, in the funding of NYCHA, in the funding of the Department of Housing, in the funding of the Health Administration, in the funding of education, is there not some way of literally, sort of beginning the process of examining the economies of scale that could grow out of programmatic thrusts that are likely to double down in the communities that need it most? Again, you're not going to find very many politicians or very many tax bases that are going to say, let's double the amount of money. even though that they certainly deserve it and need it. But you will find people who are going to say, you know what, is there a better way of being able to leverage these resources across the disciplines, if you will, in a more interdisciplinary way.
Right. So I want to transition to your time at Medgar Evers. The conversation around the country is access to universities, free college for young people. Here in New York, it's the challenges that our CUNY system is facing in the sort of huge remedial population, given the challenges that folks are having when they come out of high school. So you're the president of Medgar Evers College. This is Medgar Evers College, this incredibly historic institution. How does that national conversation affect your mission and purpose that you're working on now?
Well, the national conversation, or in some cases the lack of, affects us almost directly. It's a little bit like when I was chancellor, a war started in the Middle East would immediately result in my population growing for several semesters by 10 to 20,000 students. Literally, you could have a war break out someplace in the world, and I knew within about 6 weeks the immigrant population from that land would be coming here, and I'd have more of those students and more needs for interpreters and so on and so forth. You could count it almost to the day. It's about 6 weeks. The same is true in Medgar. The conversation about immigration is an immediate conversation among students on my campus. Virtually everyone there either knows someone or is part of a family in which their first language may not be English. They immigrated here from someplace in the Caribbean or someplace else. They are, in many cases, 80 to 90% almost, students who's they're the first in their family to go to college. So the conversation about money, the conversation about tuition assistance or scholarships, all of that is an immediate relationship. It's an immediate relationship with the students on my campus. So because it's so immediate, the sort of work we do at Medgar has to be thought of as the kind of work in which you get an opportunity to do both strategic thinking about, but you have to do an immediate operational plan virtually every day, right? And so the college long-term strategic look is 7,000 going to 10,000. We need this campus to grow. Central Brooklyn is growing, and so who it is that we serve in this 7 to 10 growth should be the exact population for which Medgar Evers began in the first place. On the other hand, because it is growing and demographics are shifting, there are countless other people who are going to want to come to Medgar Evers because it is in their neighborhood and because they should have every right to get a higher education. Fastest growing population of students in Medgar Evers College right now is Latino. And we are growing leaps and bounds with numbers of students coming from China. We have more and more students coming to us from Japan, more and more students coming from various parts of Africa. So when you think about it, Medgar Evers is to Brooklyn and to these cities and towns and their respective international cousins, Medgar Evers is a backyard for many of these students who are first time trying to get out of their own homeland and come to a college, maybe having gone to 2 years before that, and now they're coming to Medgar to finish up in 4 years. But we're also, like other CUNY campuses, just simply recruiting kids right out of high school. So we have an incoming class that right now is about almost 35%. We've got 35% increase in the number of people who are checking Medgar Evers as a place to go for their first choice among CUNY campuses. If you add all of that up, what you get is a college that is now on the horns of supply and demand. If you build it, and you build it well, and the market likes what you're doing, they'll come. If they don't, the market will speak to you as clearly as it can and say, I'm out of here, I'm going to Brooklyn College, I'm going to go to City Tech, I'm going to go someplace else where they give me what I want. The market in this country has changed in such an incredibly fast-paced way that you ought to know people are going to customize their solutions to their lives, whether you offer them customization opportunities or not. They just are. They're going to figure it out, or they're going to clamor for it some sort of way. They're going to call the mayor. They're going to call the HUD. They're going to call somebody and say, this isn't working for me, and I want it to work a different way. So I get that, and therefore it means that you've got to actually have a place in your system that can be flexible enough, nimble enough to start really understanding what customization in your industry would look like.
Great. So I've had a chance to ask you a bunch of questions, but I know there are many here in the audience. So I want to have an opportunity to open it up for questions from the team. And we have mics around the room. Hopefully they work. If not, talk loud.
Hi.
So I want to ask you a question a little bit more about succession planning. So as you run an agency and you innovate it in a way that fits with your vision, and people and staff have been motivated to follow that vision, and you know that you're leaving, how do you kind of make sure as much as you can that those innovations that work continue and transition so the trajectory moves, although you can't control it, that it is positioned to move in that direction?
So I would answer it this way. I'm not a 20-year person, right? I don't do it that way. There's no place, I'm sure there's no place that would even want me to stay 20 years, right? But in the 5 to 7 years that I give myself, right, there are three frames of reference. One is you have to treat this like an artwork, like a piece of artwork, right? It can get better over time, but you ask everybody to bring their own brush, their own palette, and keep painting and keep painting. And your job is to encourage them to paint and to really, really, really get good at the sort of sound and the instrumentation and the joy that comes with people who have an art form in their head about what it should look like. Let them paint the doggone thing, right? Secondly, if you think about it, people who really want to do this work, they don't want to do it at a very shallow, artificial level. They want to do it at a deeper level. So there are two other places that you should be thinking about succession management. One is, beyond this sort of art frame, it's this ability to change behavior. Succession management operates off of the notion that you are only going to be able to continue this work, and it gets better over time, if the behaviors that got good over time continue to get better. And your job, in my mind, through succession management, is to think in terms of how to continue to focus on those behaviors, continue to focus on those things that are working, that give people pride, that give people a sense of what they can do, that allow them to not just meet themselves, but to be better than themselves, to be challenging of themselves. There's nothing in here, you as a supervisor or you as a person who does their evaluation, you can't make their behavior change. You ultimately have to ask them to change and then encourage that behavior once you begin to see it. Third part is change the assumptions by which they do the work in the first place. So the assumption level, once you start changing people's assumption, in my industry, it would be to change the thought about poor people being educated, about poor children being educated, about kids whose first language is not English being educated, about them being brilliant. You see, there are an awful lot of people who kind of bit hard on this notion of the bell curve, and they said half of this audience is really smart by definition, and half of you are not. Half of you can go to college, and half of you cannot. So my job as a teacher is to figure out which half is going to go where, right? You got to change that core assumption. So the way you change core assumptions is you begin to create a vision that is operating off a premise of a very different set of assumptions. Succession management says, I want you to buy those assumptions and incubate them into the future going forward. And that's, I think, ultimately, you got to hire people who will do that. And that's why it's so important. You don't have a whole long time to do it, but you can get people to sign up for that vision, sign up for that painting. They'll sign up to do that every single time if it's compelling. Now, if it's a minimalist kind of a painting, or it's painting by the numbers, right? Good luck.
So large government organizations don't exist in a vacuum. They're within some kind of context. And often the inefficiencies that cause the frustration are because of constructs that are outside of your power as a leader. Yeah, there are procurement laws or there's hiring rules. And I'm just curious how much of your energy you put to trying to change what wasn't really in your control, but which impacted the very core of what you were trying to make better.
That's a great question, and you're right. They don't exist in a vacuum, and you've got to be careful about how much time you spend out on this island, right? Don't go out there for a sandwich. You got to make it worth your while. So in my case, when I was here, New York City had 32 school boards, 32 local boards, 32 superintendents, and each and 32 school districts, right? The superintendent did not report to the chancellor when I came here. The superintendent reported to their local school board. And so I started coming in, and I read all the budgets of 32 different school districts. And when I'd read them, I would say, wow, you spent $3.1 million on instruments. Let me find, you must have a heck of a band, right? So I would say, I'm going to go to that district. I want to see your instruments, or your band, or your drill team, or something. And when I'd go, I would see that they had none, right? They had none. Well, Chancellor, we don't really have music. We only bought the instruments, so when we do have a program, right? I needed the law to be changed so that these superintendents and these school boards reported to me. I couldn't remove anybody when I first came here. This was a titular head, kiss a baby on the cheek kind of job. And I said, that's not worth the risk for me. Now, I came here to play, and I came here to win on behalf of children who needed a win. I can't win the way this arrangement works right now, where the superintendents don't have any relationship, don't have to listen to, don't have to follow any directive, don't have to do anything on behalf of anything I say. And so I went to, along with Rudy, to his credit, I went to Janet Reno, God rest her soul, went to Janet Reno and filed for a change in the law for me to be able to suspend or remove local school board members who were public elected officials. So this is a constitutional change. And they didn't want it. They fought it. The boards fought it. They essentially said, I was overreaching. This is an ego move and so on and so forth. No, it wasn't that at all. It was, I can't get at test scores. I can't get at spending patterns. I can't get at writing out or eliminating corruption unless I basically get rid of this stupid law of you don't report to me. So she signed the law. It gave me the opportunity to remove school boards forthwith. I removed roughly 13 superintendents under that. I removed about 10 different of the 32. I removed about 10 different school boards. And many of them went to jail. So as a result, what you realize is that was a case of me going outside the scope of what I really did for a living, but I needed to go do that so that it affected my ability to do the job on a day-by-day basis. Yeah, yeah.
Other questions? Okay, Karina, you're next after.
Hi, my name's Andrea. I am a bit of a fan. I did not have children in public schools when you were chancellor, but in my mind, you are the standard.
Thank you.
I'm curious if there's anything that stands out in your mind during your tenure as chancellor that you think may have been a game changer in convincing external stakeholders that the school system, or really the students, were worthy of new investment, whether political or financial.
Great question. Great question. Yes, and the thing that I would say, almost bar none, was the return of the arts to the New York City public schools. As I told you, my father was a musician, so I had a natural inclination to the love of the arts. But when I went to these schools, and literally I would go through their budgets and see, how big is this art budget? How much do they spend on art in this district versus this district, and so on and so forth. It so happens that there was a correlation in the number of parents wanting to go to certain schools and the availability of these arts programs. Made total sense to me. This is supply and demand. I want my kid to have an opportunity to go to Carnegie Hall. I want my kid to go to Lincoln Center, whatever. Made total sense. Once we began to really talk about this, I realized that the amount of money that was needed to do this was way bigger than any ask I had ever made of the mayor. And I went in beyond my budget, over and above what I normally would have gotten from the city, and I said, listen, there are 2 projects that I want to spend money on that I'm going to need some help with. He said, what are they? I said, one is, I've got to get kids out of the business of thinking about extended learning as a bad thing, that they're going to summer school or they've been put back or any of that. And we created something called the Chancellor's District, which is a way of being able to put more money investing in the lowest performing schools in New York City, of which there were about 200 at that time. The second thing was I needed money to be able to place in the arts. And he said, how much is it? I said, I need about $75 million over and above my budget. This is just a special allocation to me to let me put in the arts. That would include teachers, instruments, programs, all the things that parents want to, and frankly expect. And he gave it to me. And he gave it to me. And he gave it to me with this notion of, this is a quid pro quo, right? I'm going to give you $75 million. I want you to do with it what you will. I get the credit. Fine. Fine. Bet. We're on. We're on. Right? I got it. I want nothing in the way of credit. What I want is I want to go to schools and I want to hear those instruments. I want to see those kids on a theater stage. I want to see people being able to connect with their own rhythm and rhyme of their own culture and their own communities and so forth. That $75 million was even not enough then. But then, interestingly, I was on the board at Lincoln Center, and I said to Wynton Marsalis, who was a dear friend, I said, Wynton, would you come to a campus and do a concert with me that I can begin to showcase the reinstatement of the arts to the New York City public schools? He said, better than that, he said, I'll come and I'll play. You bring some of your students, I'll play with them. You got a jazz ensemble, I'll play with them. Wynton came, he then, and that was a big deal, he then helped me to leverage Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney came, he donated $1 million. VH1 came, they then donated another $1 million. Right? Leverage, leverage, leverage. And you have to be willing to say, you know, the hard part for me was going and asking for the first 75.
Right.
Right? I mean, I got to go ask this man. But to his credit, you know, I mean, I actually saw Rudy the other day for the first time in almost 20 years. So if you hear me speak of him, I have, you know, my own folly with this guy. Obviously, I mean, he took from me the best job I've ever had in my entire life, you know. But with the exception of my Medgar family. But in his mind, that was just transactional business. right? I ain't mad with you, Rudy. When I saw him, he was very interactive and fun, and hey, man, how you doing? How's your family? And it's almost like that never happened. For me, it's a constant reminder of a scene of an accident, almost. So right? But I'm able to be objective enough to say he helped me to do that. He gave me the seed money to be able to do that. You can't leverage Paul McCartney, Wynton Marsalis, Gloria Stefan. You can't get the industry to pay attention to you if you don't have some leverage money from the very beginning. And he gave that money, and so to his credit, and I gave him all the credit for it. He deserves it. He can have it. But sadly, I'll finish on this note. Sadly, in the 20 years that I've been gone, or roughly 20 years since I was chancellor here, this stuff is gone again. It's gone again.
2 more questions. Karina, and I saw a hand in the back. David Farber. We'll go with Karina first.
Hi, I'm Karina Tota. Before you were speaking about identifying, sort of in your initial disaggregation, where things are sort of working well and continue to go on, and that's kind of a status quo funding versus a design and development need. And whether those were individual schools or program areas, I think about how we could disaggregate our developments like that. And so what I'm wondering is, how did you join together those 2 streams so that there could be learning in the design and development from those that were doing well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you have to, this is a case where the institutions have to go slower to go faster. You literally have to pay attention to your own data to help you understand not just what's working, but why. Why is it, why are some developments actually really, really, really good, and they're showing huge dividends in the way that families are coming and families are being raised, and safety that's being promulgated in the community, activities that are there, cleanliness, whatever the index is. You got to say to yourself, hey, there's a reason this is happening. I need to understand the reason for this. Once you actually understand that, and you have to do that on a disaggregated basis, but once you understand that, then you've got to actually, it seems to me, sort of say, for the places that are not doing this, we have to measure whether or not we want everybody. Is this going to be one of these things that cuts across by policy? Everybody now, we're going to now have everybody doing 3rd grade reading the way that school is doing 3rd grade reading, or the way that particular community is doing housing and policing. Is that how we're going to do everybody now? Or are there some mitigating circumstances that should suggest that we do it a little differently? You have to make that calculation, right? But the merger of the design place and, if you will, excuse me, and the ability to now have the design meet the sort of forward thinking of where the future is going to go, you have to let people, I mean, it's a little bit of intuition here, but you have to let a little bit of the organic nature of this begins to kind of lean in one direction, and the inflection point is not dramatic. It's generally pretty minute, and you have to be willing to pay attention enough to it to say, it looks like if we do this more, if we add more of this, we're going to get a payoff. We're going to get a payoff, and there will always be a concomitant loss as well, but we're going to get a payoff in the area that we wanted. The most important part of what I'm saying to you is the disaggregation and pay attention. Pull it apart. Pull it apart. These problems are solvable. America's illiteracy problem is solvable, but you cannot do it in a macro, sweeping, one-size-fits-all kind of way. You know, what they do in Baltimore is going to look a little different than Philadelphia, than Jersey, than New York City, and so on and so forth, right? But if anybody were to go and look at this as a region, and you said, you know what, we want to be able to affect literacy rates in the East Coast region, as opposed to in Baltimore City public schools, right? The size of the region gives you so much more territory by which to leverage new assets into the game. This is a question of reducing the isolation of the region. And so you have to start thinking about corporations that can play, and how do they get to play? Philanthropy, and how do they get to play? Ways by which other interagencies get to play, and how do they get to play? So you have to structure new rules for the game so people can win it. And if you don't restructure the rules, people will smell out that it's not winnable, and therefore the risk aversion becomes high.
Question?
Yes, hello. I think currently there's a lot of emphasis, particularly in education, on the individual accountability, performance metrics, teachers, principals, et cetera. So when you are coming into a new situation and how do you think about whether how much focus there should be on improving individual accountability and performance versus how much emphasis there needs to be on changing vision and system and process, and it's sort of the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
You know, how do you decide when it's right to measure whether individuals are getting better? Is it necessary to have the new systems first, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I approach it very much in the same way as I was speaking with this young woman to my right. I think that the first leg of the stool is really about creating a compelling vision. People need to know where we're going to go, and they need to be able to say in their behavior and in their voice, I'm willing to go there. Is it scary? Yes. Will you help me? Yes. Will I get fired if I take a step in that direction? No. They also need to know what the rules of the road are for going there. And one of the rules of the road is that if you choose not to go, you may leave. You may not say you're going to go and then don't go. You can't do that. But if you say you're going to go and we're going to change the way the New York City Public Schools works, and we're going to do that vis-a-vis reading programs or math programs or budget expenditures or whatever it is, then I would expect you to be all about, all in, leaning into, leading from the place of that vision every single day, every single week, every single year. Now, the issue of accountability comes into play when I want to know whether we got there. And I say we as opposed to just you. I want to know, did we get there? And what was your role in helping us to get there? Now, I happen to believe that your behavior will speak more clearly and more definitively about your commitment to that cause and to that vision than anything you will articulate out of your mouth. We call them accountability. It's not about accountability, it's faith. It's, do you have faith? And do you have faith in you enough to do this? Because I put my faith in you. I was there. I was there the day you said yes. I want to know, do you have faith in you, and do you still believe in these, in my case, young people? Do you believe in these communities? You believe in these parents? Yeah, they come with bedroom shoes on. Many of them don't come at all. Many of them don't have a cell phone. Many of them are not able to come to college or come to school and see your back to school night. I need to know, are you willing to basically stay in the loop of wanting to do this in spite of how poor or how defective many of these lives may have been? And if I get from you the sense, as I did with several principals who immediately when I first became chancellor, I went up to a couple of schools and they said to me, Rudy, look out this window. I looked out the window. They said, you see those projects over there? I said, yeah. They said, you know what, my reading scores suffered the second they put that housing project up there. I said, well, tell me more. They said, yeah. They said, I used to have a great school. We used to have great reading scores. We had parents from, Riverdale who wanted to come here. Now, all those parents left. All I got are these projects, and these parents come in here, and all they do is they come only for the lunch and the free meals and on. And I'm listening to this man. I'm thinking, now, I'm paying this man $100,000, 6 figures, to disbelieve in the product that he is supposed to be educating. and I said it to him, I mean, there are some things about me I cannot stop. You don't have to worry about this problem, young man, anymore. This is not a problem you got to worry about. So the accountability has got to be fair, it's got to be honest, it's got to be objective, performance-based, but on the other hand, it's got to be completely, sort of swift. If you don't want to do this, it's okay. I have no judgment made about you, but then just clear out. Just leave. And I did this to about 3 or 4 principals, and it was just instantaneous. Today, pack up that stuff on your desk right there, just take that stuff, put it in the car, and go. Now, the price to pay, right? They're all part of a political machine somewhere, right? So there's senators and Congress people are calling me and telling me I've got to put them back, and this person was a worker for me during my campaign, on and on and on. And I said to the politician, I'll tell you what, when you tell me that I have the right to tell you how to vote on the floor of Congress, that's when you get to tell me who gets to run one of my schools in New York City. So you live in that lane, and you will die in that lane. That's what I'm saying. It's a 5 to 7 year run. Don't think you're going to be 27. Don't think you're going to give you a watch after 20 years. It's not going to happen. You're not going to make 20 years. But if you sign up for doing that kind of work in these kind of institutions, in housing it's the same, I would imagine. From what I'm seeing from the outside, you've got the same tyranny of the day-to-day. How do you change people's perception of poor people in their housing? You've got people who don't believe that there should even be public housing, and they're drawing a check. Now, that would get me to the point where, I'm mad about it right now. Right? So I would not be a good candidate, and I wouldn't even apply, but I wouldn't be a good candidate for a job involving, supervising all these people, because I can tell you right now, a third, and it roughly is, my experience is, it generally is about a third of the workforce are non-believers. Now, I don't sign up for the job saying, let me find out who that third is. I think, frankly, the good Lord will reveal who's with you and who's not. All you have to do is push them up to the place where you say, the pool is right here. You said you could swim, let's see now.
So I think, is there any burning last question?
Yeah, please. I'm trying to keep this job.
Sit and talk with you for the rest of the afternoon, both in your passion is so evident, your caring about our city, about communities of color is so present that it really is something that I could spend all day doing. And so I want to thank you again, and we want to thank you for joining us today. And if I had to say, the one thing that really stuck with me is that you said, give people their own brush and just keep painting. And so I want to challenge everyone here to just keep painting. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.